from the Mozaic Works studios, and today we have a special guest from Stockholm, Sweden, Thomas Sundberg, and we will discuss about behavior-driven development, or as it is known, BDD. But first, how about some introductions? So, Thomas, who are you? What are you doing related to BDD? What are you doing related to software development in general?
Thank you, Alex, for having me. Yes, I am a developer. I've been doing this for quite a long time now. I mostly do Java development. I mostly do backend development. My interest in behavior-driven development came from something I did quite a long time ago, where I was looking at executable specifications. Mm-hmm. I've been doing test-driven development for a long time, and that's nice, but it's not that easy, and it's not that easy to understand what people want sometimes. And so when I learned about executable specifications, I learned a little bit about tools like Cucumber, JBehave, and things like that. And from then on, it had grown. And today I really like and do a lot of work, or try to do a lot of work with behavior-driven development. So I do speaking at conferences. I use it in software development in a few different settings. One of them being a product that I've been working on for a couple of years by now, and it is now being commercialized, where we have been using BDD as a tool for understanding what should we really build. So that's me.
Okay, so you find BDD as a useful tool, you said, for understanding what you need to build. I know that yes. Many people from with a technical background, most programmers, they understand by BDD a way of writing tests. It's given when, then you write the tests like this, and this is BDD.
Yes.
What are they missing?
They are missing the fact that behavior-driven development is a communication tool. They are missing the fact that it's Cucumber as such, which is one example of a tool that can be used, is not a testing tool. It is a tool for sharing, documenting, and executing examples. It's not a testing tool, it's a communication tool. So it's the purpose is to make it easy for people to understand the problem we are trying to solve. Mm-hmm. If I take a non-technical person and I show them a piece of unit test code, that would be Java code, chances are that they don't understand what I'm talking about. They can't read it. There are too many semicolons. A lot of weird things. But if I can show them a concrete example where it's very clear where we start, with what are our prerequisites, and then how do we use this thing, and finally, what do we expect? So given that something is in a certain state, when we use it, that is, change the state of the system, then we expect a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. That's the examples. And the good thing with those examples is the fact that they can be understood by most people. You don't have to have a master of science in computer science to be able to understand them. And most people, they don't have that kind of background, and they shouldn't. We need people who are really good at software development, but we also need people who are really good at the problem domain. So, and we need to be able to communicate. Mm-hmm. And I find a lot of technical people, they have a hard time describing what are they actually working with. there's a lot of mumbling, and then there's some technical mumbo jumbo, and it's hard to understand what are they talking about. They have, it's complicated. It's hard with the abstractions, and this is a tool for talking about concrete examples, and therefore abstract away a lot of technical details that are important, but not in every context.
Right. So how about we start from a simple example? I know you are working with a doctor for sometimes. It happens that I also worked with a doctor. This would be an example of a user that's non-technical but wants to achieve something, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have a small team of people, how do you use BDD in this context? Walk us through the steps.
Well, what I do is I ask them a very powerful yet very simple and non-threatening question. Can you give me an example? Mm-hmm. And could you give me an example of in this situation, what should we store? Why should we store it? Is there anything special that we need to remember? Okay, and why should we do this? Mm-hmm. So in the case I'm looking at, it's very much about keeping track of stuff that has been done, which may not be the most complicated domain in the world, but there are also exemptions. For example, the logic around presence. One of the problems we're looking at is doctors that should do 5 years of certain training. Mm. And how do we calculate 5 years? Well, that's 5 years as an employment, but you do not count. You can't include in those 5 years, you can't include days when you have been sick. You can't include days when you were home with on paternity leave, but you can and you should include things like vacation. No. So could you give me an example of this person? Let's call this person, I shouldn't use the proper name here. So let's call this person Niklas. I have no idea who Niklas is. It's just a fictional person. He's supposed to be at a certain place from the 1st of September until end of November. So that's September, October, November. That's 3 months. But unfortunately, he's home with a sick kid 2 weeks. So how long time will that placement be? Could he use that when he applies for his degree? Well, he could use 6 weeks. And doing that calculation is actually not that easy. It sounds very easy, and I failed with it a few times, and now I think we're almost there. Starting out with the idea that, hey, this is simple. How hard could it be? That was wrong. Yeah. I made that mistake. But given a few examples, so we have a date. We know that you only are supposed to work 5 days a week, as in Monday to Friday. But the rule says 5 years, which includes days when you're off, so Saturday, Sunday. But unfortunately, this person, he had a sick son, so therefore he couldn't be there for 2 weeks. That's a long time, probably a really horrible sickness. I don't know what it was. And doing that calculation is hard. And the only way I found to be able to really understand this and to be able to test it on people who know the domain but don't know how to program it is to come up with an example. Mm-hmm. So given that he is at a certain place between these states and that his son is sick between these states, how many days should he be able to include when he when he applies for his diploma? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an example.
And I guess you'll have more examples here. So you'll have an example for the situation when there's no perturbation, let's say. He just can use the whole time for his degree.
Yes, absolutely.
There's an example for something like sickness of a child. There's an example for various combinations between things, for a holiday and the sickness, for all these kinds of things.
One of our most complicated examples so far is one person who is on paternity leave 20%. That's Wednesdays in this particular case, but we only know 20%. Okay, so you remove one day a week, except for those weeks when she, because it's a she in this particular case, participates in some kind of training, because then she's not away, and it's her training is stored or logged as absence.
Oh.
And now I got an what do you call that, emergency headache. So there are examples that are very complicated, and but we can document them. We can talk to people who knows how it should be calculated by using examples.
Mm-hmm.
And we can use a persona so we know who we're talking about. I don't want to use a proper name, and we don't do that in our examples either. But I know who it is. I've met her. Mm-hmm. And that makes it easy and hard.
Yeah. So that's, by the way, this situation reminds me of when we were doing drug prescriptions, implementing that logic in our application. And for example, for chronic prescriptions, you have the drug prescription is given for a month. But then the question is, how long is a month? And it turns out that it's in that situation in Belgium, in medicine, is precisely 28 days. No less, no longer, because basically the pills in a box are multiples of 28 or subdivisions of 28. So you have 28, right. 14, 7, 56, and so on. So
Okay, makes sense. Although I'm almost a little bit surprised, because it's an old domain, and old domains tend to have rules that gets more and more complicated. A month, we know that the month could be, given the calendar I'm following, anything between 28 and 31 days.
Yeah.
And it's not even fixed because we have leap years and so forth.
Yeah. Precisely. So but it's quite complex when you look at it, because you start from the notion of a month, which you think you understand what it is.
Yes.
And then through examples you figure out, actually no, this month is different from the month that I'm used to. It can be something very different.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a case, let's say it's a happy case, when you are very close to your customer, you can discuss with them, you can discuss with your users as well. But how about other situations in which I'm sure you've met? You are inside of a product development team. Maybe it's one team between 10 other teams that are building the same product. You have maybe a product owner or a project manager or something like this. How do you deal with, how do you use behavior-driven development in this context?
It depends, which is the consultant answer. It depends a lot on the audience. Sometimes I'm not sure that tools like BDD and Cucumber, I'm not sure that they can carry their own weight. Because sometimes it's too much overhead to use them. Sometimes they're great because they can be used as a medium to transfer these ideas, examples. So it depends a lot. So let's assume that this product owner is a non-technical person. Then I would probably do my best to talk in examples, or have them talk about examples. Because it turns out that if you have a session where you discuss something and you get one example, then you can bet that the tester is probably the tester. They will probably negate something and ask, okay, so what happens in this case? Mm-hmm. And then the developer will build on top of that and change another thing. And okay, so what happens in this case then? Are you sure? And all of a sudden, we have a situation where we started with one example, we tweaked it a little bit, and ended up with maybe one more or two more. It happens that we don't know the answer, or the product owner don't know the answer. No one knows the answer. So okay, so that's a situation where we, by using examples, could find something that we didn't know a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. So we have a chance to find what is sometimes referred to as the unknown unknown. Mm-hmm. Things you don't even know that you don't know. Yeah. And there's obviously impossible for anyone to know what they don't know. Because then all of a sudden it's not the unknown unknown, it's just unknown. You know that you're not too good at that area. So this technique, which is you could use it during an example mapping session where you bring the proper people. The proper people is probably three. So that would be someone from knowing the business, a product owner, a developer, a tester, and why not bring in a UX expert? So someone who really knows how the user interface looks like. So you bring in these three people. Oh, if anyone can count, you heard that I was mentioning four. So the three amigos, that's 3 to 5 people meeting together and having a conversation. If you do this, then you will have hopefully enough perspectives, so you will find things that you don't know about. The product owner, he or she knows some stuff. The developer knows some stuff. The tester knows different stuff. And UX persons have the user interface in mind, so that person knows even other things. And all of a sudden you have 4 perspectives on the same example or same problem. And therefore you can take an example and fiddle a little bit with it, change it, and maybe find that there's a rule here. A few examples may give you a rule. You say that you start with a user story as something I want to, so that something can happen. That may sound very clear and ambiguous, but it turns out that it's very easy to misunderstand these things. So having concrete examples where we really talk about it. You have a teddy bear there. I was thinking, can we use a teddy bear for something concrete here?
I have a teddy bear.
You do have a teddy bear, and it's a very nice teddy bear. But I'm afraid, no, that was a bad idea. I can't come up with something really good where we can use a teddy bear, except that we can describe things for our teddy bear. But that's another thing. That's a debugging technique. But anyway, so we have different perspectives. And bringing in different persons, bringing in different perspectives, that's really, really valuable. And you can do this using the technique of the meeting form, 3 amigos. You can play around with something called example mapping, which is one of the practices described, and we try to use it in the BDD community. We have conversations, and we have concrete examples.
And we'll see a few examples of this soon. We have prepared some examples to work on together. But before that, I think it's interesting to note a few things. First of all, by looking at this problem through examples, you may find bugs before they happen. Actually, before you even implement them, right? Because you think about different examples and you figure out what you don't agree on yet. and agree with it sooner rather than later.
And you can find negative examples as well. If we have a user story as a something, I want to do something, it's very easy, at least for me as a developer, to come up with a positive example, the happy path. And I may not be capable of coming up with a lot of error scenarios or error examples. But if we bring in someone with another mindset, someone with a testing mindset, then all of a sudden you can find a few negative examples as well.
Yeah, because developers are more focused on building things and testers are more focused on finding what doesn't work. So then by placing these two perspectives together, you get a better view on
yes.
what
and then we have this perspective of a product owner who hopefully knows what the end customer want.
Yes. Okay, so let's say we have these meetings. We meet, we discuss, we come up with examples. What do we do with those examples?
Well, you can do two things. You can either take them into consideration and actually implement them as executable specifications, or you can stop there. You can stop there because you spend time exploring the problem, and now all of a sudden you have better knowledge. I don't recommend you to stop there, but there are people working in the BDD community who doesn't do much more than that. They facilitate and make sure people have conversations and therefore explore the problem domain more and understand it better. But to get really good benefit out of it, I'd suggest that you take these examples, you write them in something called Gherkin. Gherkin is language. So you write them down in, let's call it a rigid form. It's not that rigid, but there is a form for it. And when you've done that, you can store them. I think you should store them together with the source code and make sure that they are used as basis for execution. So you, during your the build of your software, you run these examples as if they were test cases. And all of a sudden, they became test cases. All of a sudden, the examples we came up with that helped us to understand our problem better are now being promoted and used as acceptance test criteria that are possible to automate. And as a technical person, I really think this is fun, and it's a good habit to do so in many cases, perhaps even most cases.
So now if we move into the implementation part of the executable specifications, on one hand we have Gherkin and we have a way of writing these tests that I'm sure everybody can find out now through the internet how to do it, and there are many examples and so on. So we won't insist on this. But one interesting question is, if you know the pyramid of tests, how do these tests, these executable specifications, relate to the pyramid of tests? Do you consider them as unit tests? Do you consider them as acceptance or as component tests? At what level do you write them, or they are completely parallel with this paradigm?
Again, I think that it depends. It depends. I definitely have examples that I execute through the user interface. So I use them to run tools like Selenium if we're working on a web application. So I definitely have examples that are on the top of this, which name did you use?
Pyramid of tests.
testing pyramid. Some people call it the agile testing pyramid. It's I don't know if works in English, but there's a proverb in Swedish that says that a love child has many names. And I'm not sure if that can be translated properly. But this is something, it's a good metaphor, and it has many different names. And I'd never heard the one you used. I do understand what you mean. So we can say that the shape of the pyramid tells us a little bit how many tests we have of different types. And I can use these examples, and I do use these examples both at the top of the pyramid and in the middle and in the bottom. So there are definitely cases where the examples are very interesting, but it's not interesting to fire up and run the entire application. I can definitely run parts of the application because I'm validating an algorithm somehow. So I can definitely use these examples to run towards a model inside of some kind of system. And I guess we would have to draw a little bit to be able to show this properly, but it's just that's a bad word. It's a matter of selecting which seam do you want to connect to. So, or which seam do you want to use for talking to the system under test? System under test being our application. So I can definitely I can run the same examples, and I do that in some contexts. Same examples, and I run them through Selenium. I would probably not run too many of them because that's rather slow and it's rather brittle. I could run more of them inside in the middle of the pyramid. I think you refer to that as component tests.
Yeah.
Once again, there are so many different names. Would be something larger. And then I can definitely run them towards really tiny parts of the domain where some people would use unit tests. And it all depends. My decision, should I run these examples or should I write a unit test, very much depending on the audience. Who care if this particular piece of code they can read and understand the verification of this piece of code? And if I don't have any stakeholder that like the format given something, when I do this, then this should happen, then I might as well write a unit test. I will still have the same format in the sense that I have arrange, act, and assert.
Yeah,
that's the same thing. So that goes again and again. But the weight of creating the infrastructure around these examples, it should sometimes, I don't think you should neglect it. So it all depends on, are there people interested in reading these examples? Will they like them or not? Will they not like them? Will they care? And if they do and have opinions, then I am definitely interested in running them in a small context, which will be very fast. If I run them in a large context, as starting my web application, starting a browser, and all of a sudden remote control it through Selenium, driving Selenium from a Cucumber, we're talking seconds here. No, we could talk about minutes, and it's very slow. I can do the same thing. If it's an algorithm, then I could just run that towards a tiny part of the model. So we're talking about what I'm thinking about here is where in the hexagon should we connect. And when I mention the hexagon, I'm talking about ports and adapters, hexagonal architecture, which is probably out of scope today, but it's very important to be aware of that you can connect at different places.
Yeah. Okay, so that's let's go back now to a higher level in our discussion, and let's think about the relation between BDD's executable specification and documentation. Should we stop writing documentation because we have this executable specification, or how do we deal with these things?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, and I wish we could say stop writing documentation because it's boring and it's probably wrong. I don't think we can do that, and I don't think we should do that. However, I think that including the executable specifications in documentation, so making sure that you can find them easily and see that this example has been verified, we know that it works. It's a good thing. But I would hate to try to understand what a piece of software is doing just by reading lots of given something, then when I do this, then this should happen. I would not want to try to understand what this thing does. I would, however, like to see it when I have a certain situation. Are we even supposed to cope with this, or is this a situation where we don't know? So yes, we cannot. I don't see that we can quit writing documentation, but we can write better documentation. And I do see that a lot of specifications, though, may not be necessary to write, because we can do a lot of things that used to be done in specifications can be done and should be done during these conversations and concrete examples. Mm-hmm. Perhaps not all of it, but some, more than some people tend to think.
Yeah, so in a way, the ideal documentation would be something that is written combined with some executable things that you can try out and have them more dynamic and see some examples, more or less. That would be...
Yes, I think that could work. But this is a domain that still needs exploring. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing BDD as such, has been around for some 10 years, 12 perhaps. It's still a young idea. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of work to be done, a lot of work that we can't even foresee today that will be done.
Okay, so on that note, I think it's time to show a bit of an example of a conversation around examples. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that the technical part, you can find documentation, you can go to workshops, you can read about those, but usually what people are missing is the actual conversation. And I thought it would be a nice thing to do some role playing a bit and try to build some examples based on this method. Mm-hmm. So I've prepared a user story. Since mm-hmm. we worked with a lot of banks in the near past, I focused on a very simple user story. Let's say we are starting a new bank. It's not possible right now, but I think with the way the technology is going, you could probably be able to start a new bank in a few days. If it's just a few years away. So if we ever want to start a new bank, we have a good start here. And
okay.
So let's imagine this: we are in a team. I could play, let's say, the product owner or client role and mm-hmm. have this conversation. And the user story we focus on is this money transfer. So we have a scenario here about money transferring. The user story is that I'm a client of this new bank and I want to transfer money from my account to another account. So now the question is, if we are in the context of defining the BDD specs or the examples for this user story, how do we frame this? Where do we start?
Mm-hmm. So the user story is, as a client of my fictional bank, I want to transfer money from my account to another account so that I can make payments. Okay, that's rather clear, isn't it? But Alex, can you give me an example, a concrete example on when you want to transfer money?
Okay, so one example would be that I want to pay my Vodafone bill so that they don't shut down my mobile phone subscription.
Okay, makes sense. So you want to pay your phone bill so they don't turn off your service. Okay, if we were to use, or if we were in an example mapping session, we would use pen and paper, and we would write down short examples. One rather good way to do this is, and to remember what they're all about, would be to write the one where Alex pays his Vodafone bill. How much were the bill?
Let's say, I don't know exactly, let's say 20 euros or so.
Okay, so 20 euro. So his Vodafone bill of 20 euro. Okay.
Now, of course, one thing, in Romania we have the subscriptions are usually in euros, which means they adjust month by month. However, we pay them in lei, so in local currency, which means I'm paying. Let's say 90 lei, just to be.
Okay, so your phone bill is 90 lei, and it's lei spelled like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So this is what I would like to see in an example mapping session. I don't want to see a complete written scenario using Gherkin. It's probably enough. Oh, thank you. It's probably enough to remember what the example is about. Because after this, and the reason is that it takes time to write them in the Gherkin format. So after this, I would probably spend some time, probably, and I, as in the developer, because I know the tooling that some of the toolings we will use, we will want to store this together with the source code, so that would have to be stored in the version control system somehow. The reason is that I want to be able to use this when we write the software easily. So the next step here, okay, so you pay the phone bill. Do we have a negative example? What happens? What happens if you, for some reason, you don't have 90 lei and you want to try to pay this? What should happen then?
Well, I guess I will get an error message saying not enough funds.
Okay, so we have another example here. The one where Alex can't afford the bill. He should get an error message so he knows that the bill will not be paid. Okay, right, so we have two examples here. We have one positive and one negative.
I'll just fix the typo. But
yes, please, okay. please. It's not that easy. Right. So we have a couple of examples. We have one positive, we have a negative. Maybe there are more examples, but that's not necessary for this in this situation. Let's move on and see how can we transfer these examples into something that is easy to understand and at the same time easy to automate. Because at the end of the day, we want to write software that support us. And we want to use these examples as a way to verify that the software actually is doing what we want it to do. We want to make sure that it's possible to pay. So let's take the first example.
Okay.
The one where Alex pays his Vodafone bill of 90 lei. So we know that you have an account and there is enough funds to be able to pay the bill. So given Alex has, and now we can choose, we can say enough funds, or we can use a concrete number. We can say that you have, I don't know, you have, and I want to use a reasonable number here, and I don't know what the reasonable number is. So I say that you have 3,000 lei on an account. And given that Alex has 3,000 lei on his account, when, and now I can use he or Alex, it doesn't really matter. We want to refer back to the step before. When he pays the phone bill, yes.
Okay.
You are the author. I'm not. Given that Alex has something, when he does something, what should we expect? What will come out of this? We have a then. And I expect two things to happen here. I expect that then should Alex account have the balance of, and now it's complicated, 3,000 minus 90, that would be 2,990 lei.
And 10, I think.
No, 10, you see.
Yeah, that's good.
Complicated. And so that is one of the outcomes. There is a potentially other outcome that is really interesting, and that is how much money will Vodafone have on their account? And we don't really know that, but we know that the money should not just disappear. They should end up somewhere. So, and the user story here, as a client of my blah 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 bank, I want to transfer money, and the transferring implies to me that there is an account where the money originates from, and there's another account where they end up. So we should be able to see that Vodafone has 90 lei extra or more than they used to have. And Vodafone should have 90 lei more on their account. So this is an example that we can talk about. This is correct. I made a mistake. I made the mistake of failing the calculation. But then again, I now see that we haven't stated here how much the phone bill should be. So when he pays the phone bill, maybe we should say when he pays his phone bill of 90 lei. Now we have a number here. So we have three concrete things here. We have the concrete number 3,000, the other one 90, and all of a sudden we have 2,910, which is a concrete number, and finally we have the concrete number 90. Where we can check. We can check that these preconditions and postconditions are fulfilled when we do something.
Okay, so question at this point.
Yes.
We assume that I have an account and that Vodafone has an account and so on. Should these assumptions be documented somehow in the example, or are they just
That's a good question.
The example?
Yes. If we start fresh, we don't have anything, then we might have to set up the accounts and do things. But in this particular case, it's reasonable to assume that somehow, through magic or something else, 2 accounts were available. If I automated this, I would create 2 accounts in the background. I wouldn't require them to be part of the example. It's how you get a bank account is not really important in this particular situation. That you have a bank account is important, otherwise you can't do the payment. So things that are obvious doesn't have to be documented in the examples.
So there is, however, one interesting situation here. Since I worked with banks, I know a bit about how these things work. When you run these tests, you need to run them on an infrastructure that is a testing infrastructure, right? You cannot run them on the actual real bank.
No. Of course, no. Yes.
And because of that, there are specific accounts that are used for testing that are known, And often it happens that you don't have a lot of these accounts because you cannot just create accounts. It's not that easy, even for testing purposes. Which means that you need to know which accounts to use for a specific test.
Yes.
And this is an interesting question that I was wondering when I was working with our customers from banking. How would you document this in a BDD context? Or should it be separate from this?
Yes. Is it important for the understanding of the process of transferring money or not?
No.
Which account you're using?
No. It's important for... It's not important for understanding. It's important for actually testing.
Yes. And in this situation, I would not do anything more here. When I implemented the first step here, given Alex has, I would pick a proper account in the code that executed this. There's no need for me to communicate which test account am I using here. And if you're wondering about this, can I do it like that? Is it okay? Take this example and bring it to someone else, someone outside of the testing domain, for example, and ask them, do you understand this? Bring it to lunch. When you go to lunch, bring it to lunch and ask the cashier that is charging you for the lunch. Can you understand this? Maybe that's not doable, but someone outside, can they understand this?
Yeah.
And if they say this is totally not understandable, then you probably have too many details. It's very easy to bring in too many incident details here.
Yeah.
It's also probably the fact that this will not be done. This will be done through some kind of user interface. And if we are in a modern bank, it's probably a web interface.
Yeah.
But you don't see anything about authenticating to the system. You don't see anything about going to the right URL, entering the amount here in a certain text box, pressing submit, going to the next account, checking their balance. You don't see any details. You don't know. If you look at this, you don't know how we're going to test this. You can't say if we're going to do it through using Selenium, or if we will send a message to the REST API somewhere, or if we will connect to some source code in the middle of somewhere. That is the the core model of the system. You don't know that. You don't know if there's a proper database involved, or if there's an in-memory database involved, or if there isn't any database involved. And that's a good thing.
So what you're saying,
we don't want these details here.
So what you're saying is that at this point we focus on understanding and not on the next steps, which are testing and whatever. We just focus on understanding the story.
Yes.
This is one thing. The second thing, what if the user story would come with UI, let's say a UI mock-up that shows you the fields that you fill in to do the transfer and all these things. Would you do the same type of specs, or would you start from the UI and talk more in the UI field?
Yes. I would most likely not write this referring to the UI. I would be happy that someone has given me a mock-up or a wireframe, because it makes my job as a developer easier when I implement the user interface. But I would not want to include it in the example here, because it's not really important here if the field that I enter the amount to pay in, if that is called the payment field or the amount field or something else.
Yeah.
And chances are that I would refer to it so I know which box to actually fill out if I had it. If I referred back to the wireframe in this example. So no, I wouldn't want to do that. I would be happy with for the wireframe because it would make my life easier, but I wouldn't want it to be part of this example.
Okay, sounds interesting, because many times I see people going into a lot of details with these things and in UI and so on.
Yes.
So
and those details, they are necessary for the implementation, but they're not necessary for the understanding. So they should be hidden in the background, behind the scenes.
Okay. So now we can move and do, let's say, one more example. I teach people at this point that there is one magical question, and the question is, what if? Right. So in this situation, when I look at this example, I have two different questions. One is, what if I have more than one account?
Yes.
Another one is, what if I'm paying from an account that's in lei into an account that's in euro? And actually there's a third one, which is, usually there's a difference in banks between accounts that are in the same bank and accounts that are in different banks. And then there may be differences in geographical areas. So for example, transferring to US or to Canada requires different data, different information for accounts than transferring in Europe, where you have the IBAN thing.
Yes.
So let's pick one of those and let's try to write another example.
So the example is, we want to transfer money from your account in Romania to account someone's account in the US. We don't really know who, but we'll figure that out. It's a well-known person, and it's a nice person, so everything is legal.
Yeah.
Right. So let's start with this, the simplest one, a good start, the one where Alex transfers money to someone. Let's call this someone Niklas in the US. Okay. Right. So given, and how much should we transfer? We want concrete things here. Not money, but we say that you will transfer $50.
Yeah, $50, let's say.
Yes. Okay. So, given that Alex, let's start with you have enough funds.
Yes.
You have 100 USD on his checking account. Because for some reason you have more than one account. You have a savings account as well. I don't know if you knew that, but you do have a savings account. And now you're going to use your checking account. So therefore we specify which account.
Yeah, okay.
Because that was important. When he transfers 50 USD to Niklas, and which account? Do we care about that? I think we do. So let's say that we transfer them to Niklas savings accounts.
Okay.
And where? In his savings account, in bank of I don't know names of American banks, but suppose there is a Bank of America.
Yeah. Right.
In Bank of America. Okay, so now we have geography. We have two different accounts. Then what do we expect should happen?
Well, I will have 50 USD.
Mm-hmm. And that's not a good number. So let's change this. Because I'd like to have different numbers. So you have 200 dollars. Then Alex will have 150 US dollars on his savings account.
I think his checking account on my.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Then Alex will have 150 USD on his checking account. Can we check the balance of Niklas' account? Probably not.
Probably not, no.
So therefore, we will probably have to stop here.
Yeah.
So we can't access an external bank because Bank of America is not the name of my fictional bank.
But
so we can't reach into another bank. Yeah.
I just realized something that we are not taking into account the taxes that we pay to the bank to transfer money.
Ah, right. So there is some kind of fee connected to this transaction.
Yeah.
Okay. And who will be paying this fee? Niklas or Alex?
Let's assume Alex is paying.
Right.
You can actually choose, but let's assume.
That would be easier if Niklas had to do it, because then we would not pay fee. But that's not the case. So you realize that you will have $150. Alex will have 150 USD on his checking account. That's not true, because there was a fee involved as well.
Yeah. So let's say
when you transfer
$10 fee.
Oh, that's expensive. Okay.
Well, when he transfers 50.
Yes.
To transfer to US, it is expensive sometimes, so yes.
Okay. So when he transfers $50 to Niklas' savings account in Bank of America, we can either put in an and step here, or we could write a long sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So can we write a long sentence here? When he transfers 50 USD to Niklas' savings account in Bank of America, he has to pay 10 USD in a transfer fee. Okay, this means that you will not have 150, you will have 140.
Yeah.
So this is one way of doing it. Does it read well, or is it hard to read? We can rewrite this and use another form. That is, we can have two when steps. We had two then steps earlier. Now we can have two when steps if we want to. And the way to do that could be to put in and here.
Mm-hmm.
So given that Alex has $200 on his checking account, when he transfers $50 to Niklas' savings account in Bank of America, and he pays $10 in a transfer fee, then Alex will have $140 on his checking account. Which one is better? I don't know.
Yeah, I probably depends on the team. I would prefer the second one, but it's up to
Yes.
to the group, basically.
I like them when they are not too long. 3 or 4 lines, that's totally fine. 5, totally fine. Longer, then chances are that they contain too many details.
Yeah.
So you can see that as an as a heuristic, that if you have a given one, then example that is 10 lines long or longer, there might be something lurking here. There might be too many details. Mm-hmm. This is something that you might want to rewrite. And I keep saying the word might, mm-hmm. because there is no firm rule here. There is no law saying that you have to do it in a certain way.
Yeah.
It all depends. But it could be a cue that you want to look at this.
Yeah.
And which is better? Which is better from a communication perspective? Choose that one.
Yeah. The one
is easy to describe.
Choose the one that more people understand. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because at the end of the day, if we can't understand these examples, they're rather useless.
Yeah.
So they have to be easy to understand.
Okay, so that's really, I think it's really cool as an example, because it shows that we started from a very simple problem, apparently, but then when you go deeper into it, you start realizing, we have fees, how much should the fees be? And we haven't even started to come up with a general rule for this. For now we are just having a few examples, and they are very useful to guide our understanding and to grow our understanding of the problem, but there's still much more work to do to figure out precisely what needs to be implemented, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you can really, I've now tried that a few times, take something seemingly really, really simple, and it turns out that it's not that simple. I have examples where in trainings where I use sending books and paying for shipment, and there's a little bit of difference between VIP customers and not VIP customers. Whoa, that's easy to complicate. Or maybe I should say it seems to be easy to understand, but it's not when you scratch the surface.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can stop here with the example, and
yes.
To close our conversation, let's think for a moment about BDD. We saw where it's useful, we saw how to use it, we also saw a few examples of usage, again just a brief example, and if people want to hear more, they can write to us and we can do other examples in the future. But I guess the final question would be when not to use BDD, when is it not very useful?
And I wish I could say it's useful everywhere, all the time, but that would be a lie. This is not a new silver bullet. BDD is useful when you have a reasonable understood domain. It's not usable when you have a domain where you're exploring, where you don't know what you're doing, when you're discovering things. Then that's not the point in time to use tools like BDD. There is something, a model called Canevin, and this would be the well-known part, not the obvious part, but the well-known part. And Canevin is a way of categorizing problems, as in trivial, well understood, emerging, and chaos. But that's another topic. These things are BDD as well as TDD is tools that work well when we understand the problem, when we can formulate the problem. If you can't formulate the problem in a good way and we don't really understand it yet, then tools like this, they won't help you that much.
Yeah, so as an example, if instead of having this example that we were working on, if our user story would be, as a human being, I want peace on earth, then yes, in that case, I don't think BDD would help much, right?
No, I don't think so either, because that's a problem that many people have been working on for a long time, and it seems to be a very complicated problem. It hasn't been solved yet. There are still bad things happening.
So it's the idea is to have access. You can use BDD when you have access to domain knowledge somehow, either through people who know the domain very well, but you need to learn from them or to transfer their knowledge into code, or by just knowing because you are one of the domain experts and you know precisely what the problem is, right?
Yes, I think so. And as this is a communication tool, if I don't need to communicate using concrete examples, I might not use concrete examples. So it all matters on the audience. If it is easy to communicate with the audience using concrete examples, use concrete examples. If the audience prefer some other way, use that other way. Some people like examples, or call them examples defined in Excel. I think that there are examples when this is rather complicated, but yes, some people really like that. Some other people, they would want to give you a mathematical formula. Yes, well, if that is a way to communicate, use that. So this is a tool for sending a message, or sharing a message, or discussing a message.
So if you would do a project just for yourself, let's say, maybe I know you also play music, so let's say something around music, it's a domain you know, and it's just a project for yourself. Would you still write these examples, or? Sometimes,
yes, because I've learned the hard way that when I go back to a unit test, look at it 6 months later, it happens that I don't understand what I did.
Oh, I see.
So sometimes I would actually consider using this to be nice to my future me, to allow my future me to understand the problem better.
Okay.
But sometimes I would not. So it depends.
Okay, so with this note, I think it's time to close. Thank you, Thomas, very much for this conversation. I think it was very interesting.
And let me say thank you, Alex. It has been it is a pleasure. And well, anytime you want to talk more about this, just let me know and we'll figure something out.
Yeah, so we'll try to schedule some more things depending on the response to this video. But until the next time, don't forget to think, design, and work smart. Coming next.
Where do you think you'd apply now BDD compared to your understanding in the beginning, in the first years?
Conversations. Every time somebody is telling me something and I don't quite understand, I ask, can you give me an example? I had somebody from a PMO office came to one of my BDD trainings. They said, it's very nice, I kind of get it, but it's obviously not relevant to me because I don't do software. And they came up to me very excited the next day. They said, you won't guess what happened. I was talking to somebody, they said something, I said, can you give me an example? And then everybody understood so much better. And we started spotting all the examples they'd missed. So you can use this with all kinds of process and all kinds of behavior.